right. Welcome back, everybody, to our latest episode of The Nest. That is the New England Sports Talk podcast. Once again, we had a very eventful week with the ongoing NFL draft, the Celtics sweeping the Brooklyn Nets and now taking on the Milwaukee Bucks, and the Red Sox continuing to be inconsistent to start the season. And we have a packed panel for today, as joining me are Ravi Bajpai, Anirban Chakraborty, Pratik Sinha, and Jeff Talon. Guys, how are you doing?
Great.
Doing well.
Doing well. Looking forward to recapping the draft.
Yeah. Let's talk about the draft first. So very interesting selections by the New England Patriots. Some would even say strange, because in the first round, the Patriots drafted out of UT Chattanooga, Cole Strange. He's a guard with a 29th pick, and he should be able to start week one, but I am curious to hear all of your thoughts on Cole Strange. It's a kind of an interesting selection, especially in round one. So let's just get started. Pratik, what are your thoughts?
I trust Belichick that he knows he's done his research. So it was an interesting pick for sure, because most of the draft boards had Strange much lower than the first round. I think they said maybe third or late second, but it seemed the Patriots believed he wouldn't be around much longer on the board. So yeah, they took him. An offensive line is a need, definitely. They need to protect Mac Jones and make sure he has enough time to throw the ball. So I like the pick. I'm cautiously optimistic to see how it works out. He probably wouldn't have been the guy that I would have taken at the slot, but I'm not calling the shots. I liked Andrew Booth from Clemson, a cornerback, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see what Strange can do.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of those things where I was really predicting a cornerback selection, like Pratik had mentioned, but again, it does seem like Cole Strange is just a really, really good athlete and is I think probably arguably the best offensive guard in this year's class. So, I'm kind of in the boat where, as long as we're meeting a need one way or the other, I'm kind of happy with it. I was watching some kind of highlights from him and his ability to really create lanes for running backs. It seems like that's actually one of his strong suits, creating blocking lanes that actually give running backs a lot of space to run into. And that plays really well into our offense, right? Our offense last season was very running back heavy, especially in the red zone. So I think this is a pretty logical pick when you look at it from that angle. I think there's just so many players and like so many other contexts going on. And we all talk about the NFL. I don't know that much nearly about college football. So I'm just going to kind of defer and let him go with it. And, I am excited because like you said, Amartya, I think he is a type of player who's ready to start for us really game one. And provided, we're hoping players like Trent Brown stay healthy this year, but if they again have injury concerns, it's great to know that we have someone like Cole Strange.
I think Cole Strange is definitely an interesting pick. I think it was a bit of a reach, to be honest, especially there were a lot of, at their original pick of 21st, before they traded down, there are a lot of really interesting prospects that have a lot more upside, I think. People like Trent McDuffie, there was Jermaine Johnson was still on the board at that point. But you trade down to get some extra value, which it's pretty much the Patriots way at this point. And Cole Strange had an amazing pro day, and I think that might have been what caught some people's eyes. He was just tearing havoc on one-on-ones. So it's interesting. I think that it wasn't they wasn't the biggest need that they had. But Bill Belichick has a very good track record when it comes to drafting an O-line. So I probably trust him more than I trust my own opinion.
Yeah, and I'll second a lot of what my other colleagues said. But the one thing I will add is, I think most of us agreed that cornerback might have been a bigger, positional need. But, luckily we did address it with the following picks. And I think this could be a good replacement for Shaq Mason, who we obviously traded to Tampa Bay early this offseason. So, and like Amartya said, hopefully he can play game one. So, we're fitting a positional need that we have, and we address the, perhaps more serious positional needs of later picks. So I think overall, good pick. You know, Bill Belichick always seems to have his own sort of draft order separate to what everyone else does, and you know, I'll trust the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because Jeff, as you noted, and like we all know now, like the Patriots had the 21st selection, but they traded down. So the idea that they still selected Strange in round one to me kind of shows that they really coveted him as the prospect the most among anyone else because they basically were willing to trade down because they knew that nobody else really coveted Strange. So maybe there is something to Strange that Bill Belichick really likes. Offensive line, as you mentioned, is like his strong track record. So really anyone he selects at that position, I'm usually pretty comfortable with because pretty much everyone has panned out. Obviously, there are probably a few exceptions here and there, but that happens with everyone, right? So I am like pretty happy with like addressing the offensive line. I think the offensive line next year should be pretty good. David Andrews, Isaiah Wynn, Trent Brown, Cole Strange, if he can even be above average this first year, and Michael Onwenu, who had a terrific rookie season, even though he was drafted in the 6th round back in 2020. So, I mean, if that's your offensive line for next year, I like it. Like, this is going to be a good offensive line to protect Mac Jones, which is obviously very important. Like we saw with the Cincinnati Bengals, with Joe Burrow, they got to the Super Bowl and they were so close to winning the Super Bowl, but offensive line that was below average kind of prevented them at the end. Like it got to them at the worst possible time. So obviously, like you can get to a Super Bowl, you can do well with a below average offensive line, but having a good offensive line is important to kind of extend the quarterback's career as well. We saw with Andrew Luck what happens if you have a below average offensive line. So I like the move, and I think as we saw later on, like let's talk about the other picks now. So Nirban, any thoughts on the 2nd round draft pick onwards, like a Tyquan Thornton out of a University of out of Baylor University. I mean, he's very fast from what I've seen. He had the fastest 40 time, 4.28 seconds, which is very impressive. So, I mean, I am a little curious about this because this is going to be a very interesting, like sort of, they brought in Nelson Aguilar for that reason, I thought, to kind of stretch the field. But now Thornton is here. So do you see him kind of taking on potentially Aguilar's role for next year?
I think that's the hope because you're right. Tyquan Thornton is, I mean, I think it's pretty fair to say he's the fastest player in this year's draft class. And when you think about the deep ball and the opportunities it brings by just having a guy who's super fast and can just sprint down the field, I mean, that's I think that's kind of what we're hoping, that he adds another dimension. Because yeah, you're right. We brought Nelson Aguilar for that reason, to kind of provide that deep threat on those kind of just big darting like vertical routes, but we didn't really see that last year. And he's already 28. So I think when you compare him versus Tyquan Thornton, I think there's just more upside to going with Thornton in that regard. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a new depth chart of like KB and Jacoby, and then maybe Thornton coming in at 3rd, and then maybe Nelson behind him as well. I don't know what other people's thoughts are, but that's kind of what I envision. I've been saying this for a while. I don't think the Patriots have had a reliable deep threat since Brandon Cooks left. So I'm hoping that maybe with Thornton we can see a new picture here.
Yeah, I wonder if Thornton's going to be in the starting lineup like right away, or is he going to get major snaps? Because they do have a somewhat deep wide receiver core already. And for a 2nd round pick, you know, usually your 2nd round and 1st round picks you're trying to slot them into the starting lineup. He is an athletic freak. Like he's 6'3" and runs 4.28. That's an insane time. But we'll see if he can translate those into actual starts and actual stats.
I'm a little bit more apprehensive about this one just because of kind of the Patriots' track record of drafting wide receivers. Like I guess the kind of the bad taste of N'Keal Harry in 2019. It's still, I mean, he's, to his credit, he's still in the league and he's a serviceable player. But when you're spending a high pick on a receiver, you want him to be able to actually make consistent contributions. And I think throughout the whole time, like Belichick has not been great at drafting good receivers early. He got Julian Edelman towards the end, and Edelman was actually a quarterback in college, so I'll give him some credit there. But yeah, the Patriots desperately need a deep threat. Hopefully, Tyquan Thompson. We know he has the speed. Thornton. We know he has the speed. We just need him to be able to actually make some catches, make some plays. So yeah, cautiously optimistic, but I'm really hoping this is the year that we drafted a receiver who can make good contributions.
I think that's pretty valid to feel burned, but yeah, I also think like definitely a pretty big need for a deep threat. We saw Mac Jones mostly making short passes, also partially as a result of just not having a consistent deep threat. Hopefully, this can be the guy. He definitely has the physical tools, as people have pointed out, but is a big bad taste after our history of drafting wide receivers. So hopefully this is the guy. But I'm also not super optimistic.
Yeah, because like I'm sort of reading about this. Apparently, the highest two Patriots receivers taken by Bill Belichick are N'Keal Harry in 2019 and Chad Jackson, I think back in 2006 or
I remember
2005.
him. Yep,
So
Florida
yeah, I
Gators.
mean,
Yep.
and neither really panned out the way Belichick hoped. So I mean, let's hope for like Thornton to really kind of take this opportunity and run with it. I mean, I think he's really good. Like he can be good. He can definitely be an asset for this team. I think it'll just come down to whether or not he's able to pick up the playbook. It's a new coach now, a new system with Josh McDaniels now in Las Vegas. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, just that's sort of the touching on that topic. So let's just quickly discuss Marcus Jones, Pierre Strong, and Jack Jones, the round 3 and 4. And they also took a quarterback, a nearby. What's his name again?
His name is Baylor Zapp.
Baylor Zapp.
Bailey.
Okay.
Bailey Zapp.
Oh, sorry, Bailey. Yeah, Bailey Zapp. I was just thinking Baylor because we were just talking about it. But yeah, Bailey Zapp. Thanks.
They took a quarterback again. Interesting, right? Because is this going to be the end of Jared Stidham? Does this mean Brian Hoyer is going to be released and maybe brought on more as a coaching staff member rather than a player on the roster? It's going to be interesting. I mean, I kind of do like that they finally addressed the cornerback situation. They have two cornerbacks, Marcus Jones out of University of Houston, and the 4th round, Jack Jones out of Arizona State University. So I think you bring them into the cornerback room, in addition to Malcolm Butler, who they re-signed, brought out of retirement, Jalen Mills, and I believe they have someone else at the cornerback spot, but I'm forgetting. Oh, the guy from, yes, Terrence Mitchell from the formerly of the Houston Texans. Yeah, so that's their sort of cornerback situation right now. Not very inspiring. So, excuse me. It is good that they are drafting in that spot, and I don't know like what to really feel about that because it's a little tricky, right? Because with the cornerback situation and in the secondary, Belichick has sort of not done great at drafting at cornerback in the past. J.C. Jackson was actually an undrafted free agent, and Malcolm Butler was also an undrafted free agent. And Stephon Gilmore, they actually signed in free agency. And I guess the last great cornerback they drafted was probably Asante Samuel, but that was such a long time ago. So, I mean, recently their track record was to really acquire a cornerback either through the free agency or trade like they did with Aqib Talib back in 2012 and sort of go with that. And I guess J.C. Jackson, Malcolm Butler were terrific finds in the undrafted free agency market. But it is interesting because a lot of their recent cornerbacks like Duke Dawson, in the 2nd round, they drafted Duke Dawson, Cyrus Jones. I think he ended up sort of also struggling a bit. So they've kind of struggled before in the 2nd round with drafting in the secondary. So I am a little bit apprehensive about how these guys will turn out, but I'm willing to give them a chance because, I mean, I guess that's kind of what the draft is, right? At the end of the day, it's kind of sometimes about being lucky with the pick as well.
Yeah, I think I'm actually a little less worried about the cornerback picks because, first of all, like you mentioned, we actually do have depth there. And I think we've agreed about this before. This might not be like the firecracker, like cornerback situation that we've had previously, but I think it's still going to be pretty competent for us. And I think that's good because it doesn't put immediate pressure on players like Marcus Jones or Jack Jones to reduce. Though that being said, I mean, I always do like to look at the case on its own merits. It is, of course, helpful to think about, what happened in the past with cornerbacks or wide receivers we drafted. But I mean, looking at it on its own merits, Marcus Jones in the AAC was actually like really, he posted some really good numbers. He had a lot of turnovers. He's actually really versatile. He can play as a punt returner too. Not totally sure, like, how often we'll need that specific skill from him, but it's still good to know. And you never really know with these things until you, I guess, give them a chance. And I think having experienced players on the team like Jalen Mills, like Malcolm Butler, I think that's just going to be a good kind of leadership and good kind of. I am hoping they'll serve as good mentors for players like Marcus Jones. As for other positions like Bailey Zapp at quarterback, I'm not really. I don't really have much to say about that. I don't really know how much we'll even see him this season. I guess it's always good to have a backup plan and insurance. But I am hoping to see the Patriots draft at least a couple linebackers because I think that's another area that we really need some extra players there. I mean, Matt Groh, the director of player personnel in the Pats, seems to be pretty happy with the linebacker crew we currently have, like Matt Judon, and things hoping to see players like Cam McGrone come back after not really playing last year. But I think it would be good to maybe get some infusion of draftees in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, definitely linebacker is going to be a need. But as far as the picks they made, yeah, Marcus Jones, excited to see how they can contribute right away. And Bailey Zapp, for what it's worth, he threw the most touchdowns in Division One FBS history last year, 62. So, granted, he played for a smaller school from a smaller conference, but I'm sure if the tools are there, he could probably earn that primary backup role behind Mac Jones. I think it's interesting to see what'll unfold with Stidham because at one point Stidham was supposed to be the guy after Brady left in the summer of 2020. For a while, it looked like Jarrett Stidham would be the quarterback, and then they signed Cam Newton, and the rest is history. But yeah, it's always interesting when a quarterback gets picked because there is a chance that he could one day end up starting and becoming the face of the team. But I don't think Mac Jones is in trouble just yet of losing his job. But yeah, that pick definitely stood out. But yeah, I hope for the rest of the way they can bolster their defense some more because that needs to be solid all year for them to compete.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit less forgiving about the quarterback pick. I think it would be a much better use of the pick to, like Anirban pointed out, take a linebacker. We have a very clear major need at that position. And, like I think we need a flyer on a quarterback? Not really. So I would have liked to see them take a linebacker or just any, or a safety or pretty much anything else on a quarterback in the fourth round. Besides that, I kind of agree that even though we maybe haven't had the best history lately drafting a cornerback, like we can take players who were undrafted and turn them into very skilled players. And I would say that's translatable, finding a undrafted free agent and finding and drafting a good quarterback. Those skills are translatable. So I'm confident in the picks that we have at cornerback. But the Bailey Zapp thing, I'm a little, like I said, a little bit less a little bit less sympathetic about.
Marcus Jones is definitely a really interesting prospect. He's got incredible burst. It's very sticky. He's just all over the place, basically. And you can definitely see a lot of potential. And if they can develop him into a good slot cornerback, then I think that'd be a lot of good depth at the position. I do want to see them get some more down the middle defensive players like D tackle or middle linebacker. Definitely, I think you missed the Nakobe Dean pick, which a lot of people missed, but I think on the Patriots he would have been incredible. So if you snooze, you lose. But it'll be interesting to see if they can find any gems in the third day.
Yeah, I mean, just a quick thing on Nakobe Dean and kind of Marcus Jones too. I think injury kind of played some role in that too, because I know Nakobe Dean's been battling like some pectoral injuries and other surgeries and types. So I know Marcus Jones recently, I believe he either has surgeries on both shoulders or like had some injury on both of them. So that is something to kind of keep an eye out for. Like, will he be ready to play on a consistent basis and then kind of the first season? Because those kinds of things, I feel like, I mean, the NFL is just going to be so much more physical and so much more demanding, right, than any college football system. So I guess it's always something to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, so I guess like for now the draft is still ongoing. So I mean there isn't much else to discuss at this point for the Patriots. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they wrap it up. So yeah, that'll sort of kind of recap our draft coverage so far. So does anyone else want to discuss the draft at all? Or do we want to talk about the Celtics-Bucks now?
I'm curious to hear what you guys have for like the biggest winner of the draft. Like which team do you think knocked it out of the park?
That's a great
Yeah.
question.
No, that's a great one. I have to think a little bit. Give me a second.
And part of the
Yeah,
issue is I haven't really been following other teams that much, to be honest.
Yeah, I tend to like kind of like the earlier picks, usually they're bad teams, which is always the case. Like the teams that are picking early, they were bad the previous year, but so they're generally not like consistently winning franchises. But I will say the New York Jets had a really good first day. They got Sauce Gardner, really good cornerback, and they got Garrett Wilson, who's probably was the best wide receiver in the draft. So I mean, they're really stacking up. The question is, can they do anything with it? Because I feel like they've had drafts before where they took good players, but it never quite panned out the way they expected. So I would rate the Jets high, and I would also rate the Giants pretty high, which I'm sure you might also agree with, Jeff. But we'll just have to see if it translates onto on-field success.
Yeah, Daniel Jones and Zach Wilson are definitely on the hot seat now. There's not much more room for excuses. I think the teams have been kind of built around them, so we'll see if they can bring up their production. In my opinion, I think the Ravens had a very good draft too. Stealing Kyle Hamilton at like pick 14 or 15, I forgot.
Yep.
That has a lot of potential to be probably the best pick in the draft, in my opinion.
Funny story about Kyle Hamilton, actually. The Washington Commanders traded down from 11 to 16, thinking they could get him at 16, and the Ravens swooped in and took him at 14. So that was a miscalculation, which is quite typical of Washington.
Early bird gets the worm, right?
Exactly.
I'm going to also mention the Philadelphia Eagles because they got Nakobe Dean. They picked up from Georgia, Jordan Davis, and then they traded for A.J. Brown. I mean, terrific draft day one, especially. So, I mean, I think the Philadelphia Eagles, especially because that's a playoff team from last year, right? So they're already a pretty good team, like roster-wise, so they got better. And they have a real shot to make like even more of an impact than they did last year. Last year, they lost to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the wild card round. I think Philadelphia probably higher than the Jets or Giants. They had a terrific draft as well, just because they were already sort of like in a better position to begin with, just roster-wise, right? So, I mean, I think the Jets and Giants, like what they did, like I think the Giants, obviously, terrific job. Kayvon Thibodeau and Evan Neal, I think they're going to help for sure. I'm a little bit still like kind of curious to see how Daniel Jones does because Kadarius Toney, I saw the Giants were shopping him and potentially making him available in trade talks. So that kind of indicates to me maybe they're not really believing in him long term, right? If they're already willing to trade him after year one. So I have some questions there. And the Jets, I obviously cannot ever trust with anything because, I mean, how can you, right? So, I mean, look, I think on paper, both of them made good moves, but it's just going to be how does this now actually translate to paper, right? Like how will they actually play? How will the coaching work? It'll be all those types of things that we can't really quantify right now, especially with like the situation. So I think I do like what the Eagles did. I think the Lions, obviously, Aiden Hutchinson went to them in number 2. And we also
my pick would have also been the Lions too.
Yeah. I mean, and then Jameson Williams, right? Number 12 overall. They traded with the Vikings to get him. So, I mean, I think that's a good haul for the Detroit Lions for sure. I mean, on day one, a lot of teams had multiple draft picks.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jared Goff is still not the long-term solution to that team. So probably next year they'll try to go for a quarterback. This year the quarterback situation wasn't that like great compared to last year when 5 quarterbacks went to round 1. This year was just one of them. Kenny Pickett.
2023 is looking like a strong quarterback draft. Yeah,
you gotta also really appreciate the patience of the Lions. They were facing a lot of pressure to draft a quarterback, and they knew this draft was not good for quarterbacks, and they did not do that. And I think they did, a great job with the draft. So
yeah, for what it's worth, Jared Goff has made a Super Bowl. Like, I'm not saying they got there because of him, but I also don't. I think he's too good to be a backup, but maybe not good enough to be a starter. So weird little no man's land.
The transitional quarterback now.
Also, what about Kansas City? Just when we're talking about great drafts, I mean, they did terrific. Trent McDuffie, George Karlaftis, Sky Moore, Brian Cook, Leo Chenal, Joshua Williams. So they did a terrific job, I thought, as well, addressing like sort of their defense. Sky Moore is a very good wide receiver. I mean, a potential replacement for Tyreek Hill down the road. So, I mean, I think Kansas City, especially considering they were already a talented, very good roster. I mean, even better than Philadelphia, right? They were in the AFC Championship game and probably should have won that game if they hadn't collapsed against Cincinnati. So, I mean, that's another great team that I think had a very strong draft. So, I mean,
the Chiefs have always drafted very well. Like last year, they got Creed Humphrey, and he was like really good offensive lineman. And obviously, they took Patrick Mahomes at number 10 in 2017. So, yeah, no, they in that case, they know what they're doing, and they're gonna continue to be good. So,
yeah, Leo Chenal was a pick that it was a great pick, and I would kind of, I bet the Patriots kind of wish they snagged him because he was projected in the second round in some mocks. Like, he's very, very athletic, has a ton of upside. Be interesting to see what they can do with him.
I think like one of the problems I've sort of had in the past now, and I kind of see it more like as the season sort of begins, is oftentimes like we always like at the start of the season we're thinking, oh, this player is better than this player because he was picked before. But then like all of a sudden, like once the season starts, it's hard to kind of comprehend like sort of like who's sort of like making the biggest impact, right? Like for example, Cooper Kupp was picked in the 3rd round in 2017. I mean, he's probably the best receiver in the football right now, right? I mean, or at least top 3. So like, and Devontae Adams was a 2nd round receiver in 2014. I mean, so you look at some of these, it's hard for us to like comprehend now, like sort of like how like everything's going to work out. So like, that's the thing, like, right? Like someone in the 2nd round might end up being the best player in the draft. We just sort of can't imagine it because they were picked in the 2nd round and like 32 people were picked ahead of them. So like, that's sort of where like, it's always hard for me to like kind of give these grades out, right? Because a lot of these grades are sort of just based on how we sort of like, how the board turned out, but how the board turned out doesn't really tell us like how the players will actually turn out. So, I mean, I like, so that's why I'm always a little bit hesitant to give like these like post-draft like grades and see who won the draft and that stuff. It's more about what type of players did they get and do those players fit the scheme the most for that team, right? Because so much more goes to a player's success down the road. It's about the coaching staff. Like look at the Jaguars, right? With Trevor Lawrence, the #1 pick, they were still the worst team again in football because they had a bad coach in Urban Meyer. So like it can just sort of like, there's a lot of other things that kind of come into play that will sort of like kind of dictate sort of like the career path of everyone who was drafted like during this like 3 days, right?
I feel like that's why there's always like some teams that are always picking early in the draft because they get these stud players, but they don't know what to do with them. So like, not to really like dump on the Lions or anything, but like there's a reason they're consistently picking in the top 5, top 10, like because they get talent, they squander it, and the talent eventually leaves and they have to draft new talent. Like Matthew Stafford left Detroit, got traded, and he won a Super Bowl. So, and they had him for 12 years, couldn't do anything. So, yeah, I mean,
Also had Calvin Johnson, right? Isn't that crazy to think?
Yeah, one of the greatest wide receivers ever, Megatron. I think they made the playoffs twice or something. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, I'm glad that at least the Patriots are not like that sort of franchise. Like last year, they had a 1st round pick on a quarterback. They made the playoffs. So I'd say that's progress. So now it's just trying to build on that.
Jeff, who did you think like won the draft, or like I guess had the best draft? Like, I mean, you asked the question, so I am curious. Like,
yeah, that's interesting. For me, who's an underrated? I won't repeat one because I feel like I'd be rehashing some of the same points, but I feel like a very interesting draft was had by the Panthers, who took Ike Ekwonu, who is an absolute beast. He just demolishes people. I've never seen someone just bowl over like 300-pound men like he does. And if I'm not mistaken, didn't they take Malik Willis, or did they take Corral?
They took
Corral. They took Corral, and he's a very interesting prospect. To get him that late in the third round, I think we'll see if he can compete with Darnold for the starter job. I think he's got a lot of potential.
Yeah, actually, one interesting thing, since you mentioned Willis, the Titans took Willis, and I wonder what that says about Ryan Tannehill's future there, because Tannehill has been solid, and they were the 1 seed last year, but he also doesn't exactly like terrify opposing defenses. So it would be interesting to see if Malik Willis gets the keys to the kingdom pretty soon in Tennessee.
Yeah, it's always helpful to think how these draft picks also interact with trades, right? Because I mean, recently the Ravens traded Marquise Hollywood Brown to the Cardinals in return for 2 first-round picks in, I believe, safety and something else. But that's one of those things, right, where Marquise Hollywood Brown was the best receiver in Baltimore, and yeah, they're gonna have Lamar Jackson back this year, but now he's going to be without that wide receiver core, really. So I think it's always interesting too. It's important to think about how the trading also interacts, right? Because Patriots also made trades with the Chiefs, right? And so I think that's another element that just makes it even more complex.
Yeah, no, this is always like an interesting time of the year because like we sort of have our opinions, our thoughts now, then we kind of look back on it like sometimes a couple of years later and you're like, wow, like so much. I can't believe we actually thought this like at the time. Like in 2017, Mitchell Trubisky went second overall, but ahead of Patrick Mahomes. Now Chicago is probably wondering, why did we do that? Because yeah, so like it happens. So it's always kind of crazy to sort of see in the future what happens. But like I mean, it's why like sort of they say the draft is kind of like it's a random process sort of at the end of the day. Like no one can really guarantee who's going to be good, who's not going to be good. Because the reality is, especially in the first round, everyone looks really good, right? Because like, I mean, of course they're going to have great film. They're going to have great statistics. They're going to have everything like going on in their favor then. So like at that point, like just because like they were really good in college doesn't mean they're going to always translate to the pros. We've seen that countless times and time again. So it'll be interesting. I mean, I am kind of curious now, but yeah, that'll sort of wrap up the draft coverage for now. Does anyone else? Okay, and then no more draft talk. We're not going to talk about the Celtics and the Bucks. Round 2 starting tomorrow. The Celtics, of course, swept the Brooklyn Nets 4-0. Feels very good after everything that sort of transpired over the past season, especially losing to Brooklyn last year in 5. And of course, the Bucks beat the Chicago Bulls 4-1. Even though they lost Chris Middleton, they were able to overcome it. So, I mean, it's going to be a great series. The Bucks, of course, are the defending champions. Very good team. Giannis leading the way. MVP, one of the greats of our era, really, in terms of how dominant he is, how good he is. So that's going to be sort of what we're talking about now. So just what are your thoughts on the series? Jeff, I know you're not a Celtics supporter, but I mean, you were still cheering for the Celtics, right?
Oh, absolutely. Anything to wipe Kevin Durant's smile off his face. It was quite an interesting, it really showed the Celtics how they are really probably the number 1 defense in the whole league. And they put it up in the playoffs, which is, where everybody else's defenses also get really good. They've elevated to an even greater level than I thought was possible. Like Kevin Durant couldn't walk 5 steps without getting an elbow in his gut and being pushed around by, every single one of the Celtics players. They got so much length. They got so much physicality. Very good at shuffling their feet and keeping in front of people. So it'll be interesting to see if they can match up with another defensive team, because that's one thing you can say about the Nets is that their defense was definitely not one of the best in the league. But the Bucks will bring that defensive intensity to match the Celtics. So it'll be very interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, I think the key is going to be obviously with Giannis, like defending him, like how you do that, like in like a proper manner. It's like so hard, right? Because he's so strong. He'll just sort of barrel into the defense. He'll get foul calls. He's like LeBron a lot of in that way, right? Like he's so strong, so big. He'll get to the rim. I guess the key will be sort of like he has improved on his free throws a lot. I'm just curious, do they still count? Does the crowd still count every time he goes to the free throw line?
The Giannis has actually changed his free throw routine, so he doesn't take the 3 dribbles anymore. He shortened that to just 1. So
That
they
was
can
so
count
fun.
if they want to.
That was so fun, though.
Yeah, I know they can count if they want to, but it's they're not going to make it to 10, unfortunately.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think he has like improved a lot as a player. So I think I am like wary of Giannis, obviously, because I don't think he's gonna like give up in a series the way like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving did at the end. So I think he has that going for him. Like I think they have a very good like I think the way the Bucks are sort of built is they're a very kind of like a shooting heavy team. Like obviously Chris Middleton, he's out for the series, and that's going to be major for the like Celtics because he's a very good player when he's playing. So like obviously in his place is Bobby Portis. I mean, the rotation's likely going to be Drew Holiday, Wesley Matthews, Brooke Lopez, and Bobby Portis to round out the lineup. I mean, just based on how they sort of finished that series against Chicago after Middleton got injured. So I am a little like kind of interested to sort of see how the Celtics handled this. Do you have Marcus Smart, obviously, on Giannis? It's Al Horford. Like I remember Al Horford in 2019 for a game at least locked down Giannis in the playoffs. Of course, the Bucks won that series in 5 games, but the one game the Celtics won, Al Horford did a terrific job locking down Giannis. So are we going to see that? It'll probably be a collective effort. I love Grant Williams' defense. He did a terrific job on Kevin Durant too. So I think that's the thing. And of course, having Robert Williams back now for a whole series, potentially rejuvenated after kind of coming back from the injury, playing some games, unlike Ben Simmons. It's going to be interesting to sort of see how that all kind of pans out now. So that's sort of like something I'm going to be kind of interested in seeing because I think the Bucks just have a better cohesion, better team than Brooklyn did in the end. Like really after like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, the rest of the depth on that team was not very good, right? Like Claxton was a nice role player, but he could never hit his free throws. 1 for 11, which was remarkable. I had not seen that before. So, I mean, there was Claxton, who is a good player. I kind of actually like Claxton because he can definitely like be a solid player. But like, I mean, like when you're relying on Bruce Brown, Seth Curry, Claxton, Andre Drummond, Blake Griffin for a couple stretches, like it's not going to work out. But I think Milwaukee has better cohesion in that sense. So I think this is going to be a tougher series for sure. And I think the Celtics probably will lose at least a game, unlike last series. Hopefully, they don't have to. Hopefully, they can still go 4-0. But I have some.
Wow, so humble of you. Celtics might lose a game to the defending champions.
Being realistic, though, who predicted the Celtics to sweep the Nets, right? Like, if anyone had told you that at the start of the series, you would have not believed it, right? So I'm just saying, like, I mean, like sweeping Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, like sweeping Kevin Durant had never been swept in the playoffs ever. Like, in fact, he had only lost in the first round once before, and that was in 2010, his first year in the playoffs, to Kobe Bryant and the Los Angeles Lakers, who ended up winning the championship. So that really shows you like kind of how he's like the greatness of Kevin Durant in a way, because I think I brought this up earlier. The team that has beaten Kevin Durant in the playoffs all seasons but one was in the NBA Finals. Just one time a team has beaten Kevin Durant, and that was 2013 when the Memphis Grizzlies beat him and they lost to the San Antonio Spurs in the next round of the conference finals. That was the only time a team that has beaten him has not played in the NBA Finals, which is like remarkable to think of. Like just sort of like when you're able to beat Kevin Durant, like you're like pretty much at that stage of being like a great team, which they are now. So
I mean, I feel like we shouldn't put too much emphasis on the years when he was on the Warriors because that was just unfair. Like the Warriors, that he was there 3 years, they made the finals 3 times. They probably would have won all 3 if he didn't get hurt. But yeah, no, I agree with your point. Kevin Durant beating him is huge, and I guess bring on Giannis. I'm not a Celtics fan, so I don't really follow the ins and outs, but I think it'll be a great series. Tatum has really improved. So Tatum versus Giannis, it'll be a great battle just for fans of basketball. And I don't know what my pick is, but I like your optimism. We might lose a game. I like that. So yeah, all I can say is good luck, I guess.
Yeah, I'm also very excited for the series. I think Tatum and Horford did a great job defending Kevin Durant, so I'm hoping they can bring the same energy to Giannis. I think obviously different skill set. Kevin Durant's a great shooter. Giannis really thrives in the paint, so we'll see if they can adapt to that. I think Giannis will still be, the Bucks are definitely going to look at Giannis versus Horford and think that's going to be that's a very favorable matchup for them. But at the same time, Jason Tatum's going to match up against either Bobby Portis or Wesley Matthews, and that's good. That's also going to be a great matchup for the Celtics. So it's going to be a tough series, and I also think that the Celtics are going to win. But maybe it goes a little bit longer than 5 games. But it's gonna be a really good series. I'm so excited for it.
So
And I
you're
think
leaving the option open because you said maybe it goes longer than 5 games. So you are acknowledging it could end in 5 games.
It could end in 5 games. I would also say I think especially because Embiid is injured right now, and I personally do not believe in the Heat that much. That these are probably in my opinion, the 2 best teams in the Eastern Conference. So this is going to be a really important series.
Isn't Miami the 1 seed?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, but they're kind of like I mean they're good. They're a good team, but I agree. The Bucks are defending champs, and Celtics are playing really well. So
Miami does worry me a little bit because I think it's just they play very well as a team together. So like Miami does kind of give me like I am a little bit worried about Miami, especially after the bubble in 2020 when they beat the Celtics and they made it to the finals and lost to Pratik's Lakers in the finals that year in the bubble. So I mean, I think Miami is a very good like kind of like well-coached team. Like everyone knows their role. They play hard. They are very good defensively. So like Miami does kind of worry me, especially if you're on the road. But I mean, I guess we'll have to get there after the series, like if the Celtics do advance. So yeah, I mean, all seriousness aside, I think Milwaukee is a very good team. They're very resilient. Last year they were down 2-0 to the Nets. And then they were also down 2-0 to the Phoenix Suns in the NBA Finals, and both times they overcame it. So they're not an easy team to beat at all. So like it'll be definitely, I think, I'll say it's probably going to be like 6 games at least. It is going to be advantageous because it's funny that Milwaukee actually was so afraid of the Nets that they actually lost their last game of the season to avoid them, and then the Celtics swept them. And in the process, the Bucks are now the 3 seed, so they basically gave up home court to avoid Brooklyn. So, I mean, that's going to be very interesting now because if the series goes 7 games and Celtics end up winning that game 7, then that home court advantage, people are going to be looking back at that moment and be like, why were you so afraid of this team? I think it is hindsight though, because again, to be fair, nobody expected Celtics in 4. So like, I think it's also like sort of one of those like kind of like, I can't believe it actually happened type of moment. So we'll have to see. I think Milwaukee is a good team, and I think that's going to be the key. Like I think Grayson Allen, obviously, he's been playing a lot better recently. 22 points in game 3 and then 27 in game 4, 13 in game 5. So he's definitely stepped up in Chris Middleton's absence. Pat Connaughton's a nice role player as well for them. So they have a bunch of great shooters like on that team, like Bobby Portis, Drew Holiday. So it's going to be very interesting to sort of see how they match up. And like, I think it's going to be one of those situations where if you collapse on Giannis, then all of a sudden you have 4 shooters who are wide open, potentially available to hit a 3. So that's going to be something the Celtics need to be kind of cautious about. How do you sort of game plan for that? That's sort of, I'm going to be very interested to see sort of how it goes because in reality, like the 4 matchups the Celtics have played against Milwaukee during the season, and I know it's the regular season, but of those 4 matchups, like you can't really take much out of it because like in the first one, I think it was in November, Giannis wasn't playing. And then the second one, he was playing, but I believe Middleton was out. The only time everyone was playing was Christmas Day, but that was also 4 months ago. So it was kind of hard. The Celtics were struggling at the time. They weren't the same team they are now. And the last time they played, Jason Tatum was sitting out because it was like a back-to-back. That was a pretty competitive game too. So I think what we've seen for the regular season is that it should be a pretty competitive series. I'll probably say Celtics in 6. That's going to be my prediction. So yeah, I think Milwaukee will win more than 1 game. They'll win 2, but I have Celtics in 6. I don't know. It's hard to win back-to-back in this league. So I'll say Celtics in 6. What are your predictions? I just want to sort of curious to hear them.
I'll go Celtics in 5. And I think we're going to make Milwaukee rue their decision to lose home court advantage. And, I'm predicting some great defensive performances from Marcus Smart and Al Horford against Giannis.
Yeah, I'm gonna say Celtics in 7, but agree with Nirban on they're gonna regret that home court advantage misplay.
I'm gonna go with the Bucks just to make it interesting. I'll go with the Bucks in 6, and Giannis gets the better of Tatum this time, but that's not always going to be the case. I think this will be a really fun rivalry in the East for years to come. Hoping they stay with their current teams.
Yeah, I think I'm actually also going the Bucks. Bucks in 7, I think, and it's gonna be tough. And I think part of this is relying on maybe Chris Middleton coming back for that game 7. But I think that the Bucks have just the best player on the planet right now in Giannis Antetokounmpo. And when it's time to take over, Giannis has shown over the last couple of years that he can just drop 50 out of nowhere. And I don't see anyone in the Celtics playing against that Milwaukee defense being able to do the same thing. So I got Bucks in 7.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll see, I guess, what happens with the series. Game 1 is tomorrow. It's going to be a fun one for sure. Probably the best second round matchup, or at least one of the best ones, right? I mean, compared to what the other ones might be in the end. What are the other matchups off the top of your head? Do you guys know? It's going to be Heat Sixers, Celtics Bucks. In the West, it's going to be Phoenix and Dallas. And then it's going to be Warriors Grizzlies. Oh, that's going to be a good one.
To me, Warriors and Grizzlies is the other matchup to watch.
Yeah, I'm not that convinced by Memphis. Like, they kind of struggled to put away the Timberwolves. So I have a feeling the Warriors are kind of marching towards the matchup with the Suns, and that'll be a really fun conference finals. But
who is Karl Anthony Towns cheering for?
Who would Towns be cheering for?
Yeah.
I don't know. Does he have
the Warriors, right?
Yeah, he doesn't like the Warriors or something.
I think I actually think the matchup to watch in the West is going to be the Suns versus Dallas. The Suns did not look that great, and Devin Booker is still not himself, and Dallas is a much more threatening team than the Pelicans. So I think that could even potentially be an upset. So
yeah, if Luka Doncic is healthy, and that'll be a great series.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so that'll sort of be our NBA discussion for today. Obviously, a lot to look forward to. Coming up, it's probably the most exciting time of the year for the basketball, right? With the playoffs underway, and a lot of now, like we're past the first round, a lot of the great matchups are like coming up now. So, yeah, so let's just quickly now talk on the Red Sox a little bit. I mean, I don't know what's going on. Like, I don't know if it's a hangover. If there is a hangover, I'm like, why is there a hangover? Because they didn't even win a World Series last year. So, what is going on here, Robbie? Like, they're 9-12. They're not playing great at all. Like, starting pitching has been a little shaky. Relievers are blowing leads now in the 9th inning. Like, what's going on?
Yeah, I'm going to say starting pitching is, probably what we'd expect. There have been some, great surprises. Garrett Whitlock has been so good, and, there's a lot of calls for him to start starting. I think besides that, considering, Paxton and Chris Sale are injured and, just the lack of depth, our pitching besides that has pretty much performed as well as you think. I think the real big surprise is our batting. We have been not we had one of the best offenses last year, and that is what, really showed up, especially in the playoffs, until the last couple of games. But, we were consistently like one of the top offensive teams in baseball. And this year that hasn't been the case. But it is, I think one of the things is we've had to deal with injuries. We've had some inconsistency. Trevor Story didn't really get off to a good start because of the lockout. It took a while for him to settle down on a team, so he had to reduce spring training. JD Martinez has had some problems with not serious injury on going onto the DL, but he's been missing some games. And yeah, I think just overall we haven't really gelled together. And then also, if you look at just the unluckiness of the team, our batted balls per inning is actually much lower than it was last year. So I think we're due for some positive regression. We're around 0.27. Meanwhile, 0.3 was our average for all of last year. So I think the offense will get better. I think the pitching is pretty much where it is, and we are in, by far the most competitive division of baseball. So I think we're a better team than this, no doubt. But it's going to be a struggle, and it's going to be. I think the success of the season is going to rely on our pitching coming back and our bullpen. Just perform. They need to perform better than this, and then that would put us in competitive team, being with like the Rays and the Blue Jays and the Yankees. So not the Orioles, obviously, who we've lost games to. Actually, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think it is like a mix of those two things. It is interesting because I think Xander Bogaerts is again having a really solid season. I believe he has a 397 batting average right now, which is on top of the AL. So nothing much to say about that. He just continues to be an elite player for us, as he has for a while. But yeah, I do feel like another part of it is just that our games have just been like, when we have leads, they're just not really reliable leads, right? I mean, look at the win we had, the 3-1 win over Baltimore Orioles, right? Like you said, Marty, that was going right until the 9th inning, and then suddenly we had a little mini crisis and came away with the win. But I was reading a stat that I believe in our last 21 games, like 13 of them come down to like really a couple of runs. And when you're kind of battling with that kind of level of margin, it just makes everything so much more stressful for everybody, right? Like not being able to put away games in kind of early innings. And I don't really know what the solution is there, because yeah, Garrett Whitlock's been really good for us. I do think we've had a few pretty good starting pitching performances. Like I think even like if you look at the Baltimore Oriole game, for example, I mean Tanner Hoke, all those other pitchers, like for 8 innings or so, we're looking like we're going to shut out Baltimore, and then it just didn't happen at the very end. So yeah, I don't know. It is, we are a few weeks in. It's not really. I think it is fair to say that the opening day kind of hangover or whatever, it is time to really start thinking strategy, thinking about the performance. As we have a big enough sample size at this point to have a picture of what's going on right now. So I'm really hoping to see it kind of shape up better, and I do feel like what Ravi said. I mean, I feel like our hitting is better than this, and it's really only hopefully a matter of time before we start to see it hitting at least somewhere near where it was last year.
Another interesting point to bring up on hitting is that they changed the balls this year to just to make it easier for pitchers to grip, which is kind of interesting. They made the seams bigger, which increases air resistance, and a couple other changes. And in general, like not just about the Red Sox, but hitting across almost every team is down in comparison to this year. So it could also be, we're dealing with the effects of that. Relative to other teams, though, we're still not doing that great. So we are definitely should be performing better than this. But I think when we start to later in the season, we're definitely going to be making comparisons to how our offense was in 2021, and that's or just in general, I'm interested to see how whether offenses in general in the MLB start to pick up, or if this is just like or if this is starting to reduce the amount of like home runs or hits or etc. that we see.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, because you could say especially the power hitting has been pretty inconsistent for the Red Sox this year. I just was reading from the MLB website previously that like we had I think we've gone like 6 games this season without actually hitting a home run, which is actually the first time this happened for us since 2001, right? Like 21 years ago. So I think that does kind of show some of the I guess some of that must be the ball situation, and that's probably also why we're seeing so many really strong pitching performances this season. So I don't know. I guess it's one of those things where everyone's kind of dealing with this, but you have to adapt to it. I mean, I know Rafael Devers has been saying himself that this is we just have to do better than this as kind of the power hitter of the team. Though I do want to say for starting pitching, I think we did mention Garrett Whitlock. I do want to give a shout out to Michael Wacha too. I think he's been pretty good for us too. He's a sub-2 ERA. Came from the Rays, of course. And I think he's also been a pretty reliable option when it comes to the starting rotation. So I don't want to put this all on Whitlock's shoulders. I think the Red Sox do have like some pretty good pitchers here, and And they are using, I think it really comes down to the closing committee strategy that they're using, where we don't really have one reliable closer. We kind of have a mixture of 4 or 5 different pitchers who we're trying to get everything out of. Versus before, look at who the Red Sox used to have, ranging from like Craig Kimbrell, Jonathan Papelbon. We've historically had a couple of pretty elite closers, and you can even go to Keith Polk many years ago, of course. So I do wonder if that has an effect too, when you have multiple people who are supposed to all have that clutch mindset of being a closer.
Yeah, I think analytics favors closer by committee, but I totally agree with you. Like, it seems like the people who have reliable closers like Kenley Jansen, Edwin Diaz, any of these guys, they seem to be like they're absolutely lights out. Like Edwin Diaz to close out the no-hitter last night, 3 strikeouts, that was it. That was crazy. So yeah, and then Matt Barnes, who actually did look like a lights out closer for the first half of the previous season, does not look that great this year. So they were hoping when he came back from injury he'd be good, and we'd have this kind of go-to guy. But his performance being so poor, like it's just making every time we get a lead, we got to be worried about it too, because our bullpen's coming up.
Yeah, I mean, it is like kind of like it's May tomorrow, right? So we already have 1 month of the season in, and 9-12 is not very good, especially when you consider that of those like 9 wins or like all those 12 losses, more importantly, they're actually 1-2 against the Yankees. They're 1-2 against the Rays. They're 2-5 against the Blue Jays already. So they've already lost 5 times to Toronto in just 1 month, which is kind of concerning. Like, obviously, I'm sure they'll win a series or two in like the coming months when they play Toronto again, but it is kind of concerning that already against the AL East, they are struggling a lot. There is still a lot of time for them to figure it out, but it kind of makes you sort of wonder, like, what was the plan going into the season? Because last year, I mean, expectations were pretty low at the start of the year, right? And then they ended up going to the ALCS. And I think now, like, you're sort of like, what's the plan from now? Because now, like, essentially, like, you traded Hunter Renfroe, who was a very good outfielder, for Jackie Bradley Jr., who has been sort of struggling this season. Like, there's sort of like you have contract disputes with 2 of your best players in Rafael Devers and Xander Bogaerts, and it's just not a great situation right now. So I'm kind of wondering, like, what's the plan? Like, what was the plan going into the season, and like sort of what's the plan going forward? Because after last season, when you sort of built up a lot of goodwill again, like what are you sort of doing now to sort of like kind of go about that? So I am a little bit sort of wondering what this plan is. Like, it's not clear to me anymore, because last season they were so good, and now this season is sort of kind of reverting back. It's sort of giving me like 2019 vibes again. So I don't know like what to really think of that.
Kind of reminds me of the New York Knicks. You have your expectations, and you make the playoffs out of nowhere, and you just got to realize sometimes that the talent is really what drives long-term success. So, but on the other hand, you can never count them out. From just the beginning of the season. You saw the Celtics were under 500, to start out, and then all of a sudden people were calling
that for RJ Barrett buzzer beater.
Yeah. People were calling for Ime Udoka's get fired. Now he's in consideration for Coach of the Year. So
he's a genius.
Yeah, exactly. So it's still early. You gotta give them some time to adjust, make adjustments, and really diagnose the problem and come up with some solutions.
Yeah, I think over the next 2 weeks, looking at who we're going to be playing, I think we are going to be finishing up the 3-game series with Baltimore, moving on against the Angels. Who Angels are above 500, so that'll be a little difficult. But then we play the White Sox, the Braves, who are both kind of around the 500 with us, and then the Rangers who are below. So these
the
are
Braves are the champions, right, from last year.
They are the champions. But I'm saying, like, in the context of this season, like, their performances have been, I'd say, pretty on par with how we've been doing. So I think these are games that are, let's see if we can get some momentum going. I mean, and seeing if we can, be over like 500 over the course of these next couple of games, get into some kind of good run to start really the season, and ask me again in a month, I guess, how I feel about things.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, any other thoughts on the Red Sox? Okay, yeah, I guess that'll wrap up this week's episode. We don't have Rohan, so we won't really have our hockey segment, but the Bruins are playing the Carolina Hurricanes, so that will be an interesting series, but we'll talk more about that when Rohan comes back. But anyways, that's going to be it for this week. Obviously, a lot to talk about, and yeah, we'll be back again next week. Pratik, Jeff, Ravi, thank you for coming on. Hopefully, we'll have you back again at some point. And yeah, just enjoy the upcoming NBA playoffs and the rest of the draft for your respective teams.
Yep,
Thanks for having us.
It was a pleasure.